r/AmItheAsshole for exposing my MIL theft on camera after she cut me from Will. AITA for exposing my MIL theft on camera after she cut me from Will. The silver candlesticks were back. I stood frozen in Margaret's foyer, staring at the antique pieces gleaming on her mahogany side table like they'd never left. 3 days ago, she called the family in hysterics, sobbing about how her great-grandmother's candlesticks had vanished. She looked me dead in the eye during that phone call and said, "I just don't understand how someone could steal from family." The implication was crystal clear. Everyone's eyes had turned to me, the outsider, the daughter-in-law who apparently didn't deserve a place in the precious Whitmore family will. "Oh, you found them," I said brightly, setting down the casserole I'd brought for Sunday dinner. "Where were they?" Margaret's face flickered with something I couldn't quite catch. "In the garage. Must have gotten moved during spring cleaning." Spring cleaning. In November. My husband David squeezed my shoulder as he passed, completely oblivious to the tension crackling between his mother and me. "See, honey? I told you they'd turn up." "Right. Just like the emerald brooch that disappeared last month, only to resurface the day after Margaret made a big show of searching my purse just to be thorough. Just like the gold pocket watch that went missing during our anniversary dinner, conveniently found in the guest bathroom after I'd used it. I'd been married to David for 6 years. 6 years of caring for his mother, driving her to appointments when her arthritis flared up, organizing her medications, listening to her stories about the good old days when women knew their place. I'd bitten my tongue through countless passive-aggressive comments about my career, my clothes, my decision to wait on having children. And 3 weeks ago, I'd accidentally overheard her lawyer leaving a voicemail. "Mrs. Whitmore, the revised will is ready for your signature. As discussed, we've removed your daughter-in-law entirely from the inheritance. The charitable donation clause you requested will ensure she cannot contest. $23 million. Gone. Because apparently my lifestyle choices, having a career, speaking my mind, wearing pants to church, made me unworthy of the Whitmore legacy. I could have lived with that. Rich people gonna rich people, right? But now she was setting me up. Margaret, I said carefully, has anything else gone missing lately? I'd hate for there to be any confusion about where things are." Her pale blue eyes sharpened. "Why would you ask that?" "Oh, just wondering. You've seemed so worried about the family heirlooms lately." David reappeared from the kitchen, already loosening his tie. "Mom's just being cautious. With all the break-ins in the neighborhood, it makes sense to keep track of valuables." Break-ins. There hadn't been a single break-in in Margaret's gated community in over 2 years, but sure. "Of course," I murmured. "Security is so important." Margaret nodded slowly, still watching my face. "Yes, it is. You never know who you can trust these days." The gauntlet was officially thrown. As we sat down for dinner, Margaret regaling us with stories about her bridge club, I mentally reviewed my Amazon order confirmation. 2 tiny wireless cameras, motion-activated, with smartphone alerts. Arriving tomorrow. If Margaret wanted to play games with my reputation and my future, she was about to learn that I didn't go down without a fight. The woman had no idea what she just started. The cameras arrived Tuesday morning in discreet packaging. I'd taken a personal day from work, telling David I needed to catch up on household stuff. He'd kissed my forehead and told me not to work too hard, completely unaware that I was about to turn into a one-woman surveillance operation. Installing them was easier than I'd expected. One went in the living room, tucked behind a decorative vase on Margaret's bookshelf with a perfect view of the display cases. The second found a home in her bedroom, angled toward the antique jewelry box she was always fussing over. I'd hidden them during my usual Wednesday visit, when Margaret was having her weekly hair appointment. The motion alert started almost immediately. Ping Margaret, alone in the living room, carefully removing a small crystal figurine from its usual spot and wrapping it in tissue paper. Ping Margaret, in her bedroom, taking off her own diamond tennis bracelet and placing it in my purse, which I'd left on her dresser while helping her change the sheets. Ping Margaret, back in the living room, looking directly at my purse with the most satisfied smile I'd ever seen on her face. My hands were shaking as I watched the footage on my phone. She wasn't just moving things around randomly, this was calculated. Methodical. She was building a case against me, one planted item at a time. I screenshot everything, saved the videos to 3 different cloud accounts, and tried to figure out my next move. Part of me wanted to confront her immediately, but I knew I needed more evidence. This wasn't just about money anymore. If Margaret could convince everyone I was stealing, she could file criminal charges. I could lose my job, my marriage, everything. Thursday's family dinner was torture. Margaret kept patting her jewelry box and sighing dramatically. "I swear I'm losing my mind," she announced to the table. I could have sworn I put my tennis bracelet right here yesterday, but now I can't find it anywhere. David's younger sister Emma made sympathetic noises. "Maybe you left it at the jewelry store? Didn't you have your watch cleaned this week?" No, I remember taking it off right here." Margaret's eyes found mine across the table. "I just hope it turns up soon. It was your father's wedding gift to me." The guilt trip was masterful. Even I almost felt bad for her, and I'd literally watched her plant the bracelet in my purse. "I'm sure it'll show up," I said evenly. "Things always do." "Do they?" Margaret asked. "Because I've been thinking about all the items that have gone missing lately, and there seems to be a pattern." David looked up from his pot roast. "What kind of pattern?" "Well, things only seem to disappear when certain people are over." The temperature in the room dropped about 10 degrees. Emma shifted uncomfortably. David's fork paused halfway to his mouth. "Mom," David said slowly, "what are you saying exactly?" "I'm not saying anything," Margaret replied, her voice dripping with false innocence. "I'm just observing that my tennis bracelet was there before yesterday's visit, and now it's gone." I felt everyone's eyes on me. Emma looked mortified. David looked confused and increasingly angry, though I couldn't tell if it was directed at his mother or at me. "That's a pretty serious accusation," I said quietly. "I haven't accused anyone of anything," Margaret shot back. "Yet." The word hung in the air like a threat. David's jaw was tight, Emma was studying her napkin like it held the secrets of the universe, and Margaret was watching me with those cold blue eyes, waiting for me to crack. I smiled and took another bite of dinner. "You're right," I said. "Things have been disappearing a lot lately." Good thing there are ways to figure out exactly what's been happening. For just a second, uncertainty flashed across Margaret's face. Game on. That night, David confronted me in our bedroom. He'd been unusually quiet during the drive home, and I could practically see the wheels turning in his head. Sarah, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. I looked up from my laptop, where I'd been reviewing the camera footage for the 100th time. Okay. Have you taken anything from my mother's house? The question hit me like a slap, even though I'd been expecting it. 6 years of marriage, 6 years of being there for his family, and this was where we'd ended up. No, David. I haven't taken anything. He sat heavily on the bed beside me. She called me after we left. She found her tennis bracelet. My heart stopped. Where? In your purse. She was putting away the leftover casserole containers and saw it when she was looking for your keys to give to me. I stared at him. And you believe her? I don't know what to believe anymore. David's voice cracked. She was crying, Sarah. Really crying. She said she didn't want to embarrass you in front of Emma, so she waited until we left to look. This was exactly what Margaret had been building toward. I could show him the footage right now, and this whole nightmare in 5 minutes. But something held me back. The look on his face, like he was already grieving something lost. If his faith in me was this fragile, if he could believe his mother's lies this easily, what did that say about our marriage? Did you ask her why she was going through my purse? She said she wasn't going through it. She said the bracelet was just sitting right on top, like it had been placed there. Placed there. I repeated the word slowly. By who, David? He was quiet for a long moment. She thinks maybe you took it without thinking. Like, absent-mindedly. She's willing to overlook it this time if you just. If I just what? Confess to stealing something I didn't steal? She wants you to get help. She's found a therapist who specializes in this kind of thing. Kleptomania. She was painting me as a kleptomaniac. It was actually brilliant. It explained the pattern she'd been establishing, gave me a medical excuse that would generate family sympathy instead of criminal charges, and positioned her as the long-suffering, forgiving mother-in-law. She could cut me from the will to protect me from the temptation of managing money, and everyone would nod along with her logic. I'm not going to therapy for an addiction I don't have, David. Then explain to me how her bracelet ended up in your purse. I can't, I said, which was technically true. I couldn't explain it without revealing the cameras, and I wasn't ready to show that hand yet. David stood up, running his hands through his hair. Jesus, Sarah. Mom said she's noticed other things too. Small stuff. She's been keeping track. Keeping track? She has a list. Dates, times, what went missing after your visits. His voice was getting smaller. She showed it to me. Of course she had a list. Margaret had been documenting her own staged thefts, creating a paper trail that made me look guilty as hell. She'd probably been planning this for months, maybe since the day she decided to cut me from the will. She wants to talk to you tomorrow, David said. Just you and her. She thinks if you admit you have a problem, the family can work through this together. I closed my laptop slowly. And if I don't admit to having a problem I don't have? David's silence was answer enough. Margaret wanted a confession. She was going to get one, all right. Just not the kind she was expecting. I called in sick to work Friday morning. I needed time to think, to plan, and honestly, I wasn't sure I could sit through a day of meetings pretending everything was normal when my entire life was imploding. David left early, claiming he had back-to-back client calls, but I caught him whispering into his phone in the kitchen before he grabbed his briefcase. When I checked our joint account online, there was a $200 withdrawal I didn't recognize. Marriage counseling wasn't cheap, but neither was a divorce attorney. At 10 a.m. sharp, my phone rang. Margaret. Hello, dear. David told me you're not feeling well today. I'm fine, I lied. I think we both know that's not true. Her voice was syrupy with fake concern. I'd like you to come over this afternoon. Just us girls. We need to have an honest conversation. I stared at my laptop screen, where her face was frozen mid-frame, planting her own bracelet in my purse. What time? 2 o'clock? I'll make tea. Of course she would. Margaret's solution to every crisis was Earl Grey and emotional manipulation. I'll be there. Sarah? I want you to know that I love you like a daughter. Whatever's been happening, we can fix this. As a family. The lie rolled off her tongue so smoothly I almost admired it. Almost. I spent the morning making copies of everything. USB drives, printed screenshots, cloud backups of the cloud backups. I even burned a DVD, because Margaret's generation still trusted physical media. If this went sideways, I wanted evidence scattered across every possible format and location. At 1:30, I got a text from Emma. Mom told me what's going on. I'm here if you need to talk. XO*. So Margaret was already building her coalition. By now, David's whole family probably knew I was a kleptomaniac who needed their patience and understanding. The narrative was spreading like wildfire, and I was the only one without a voice in the story. I arrived at Margaret's house exactly on time, parking in my usual spot in her circular driveway. The irony wasn't lost on me. In 6 hours, I'd either clear my name or lose access to this place forever. Margaret answered the door wearing her best martyred mother expression. Sarah, sweetheart. Come in. Her living room was set like a stage. Tea service on the coffee table, tissues strategically placed, my usual chair positioned directly across from hers. She'd even dimmed the lights slightly, creating an atmosphere of intimate confession. Sit, dear. Please. I sat, hyper-aware of my purse beside me. Was she planning to plant something else? Add to her collection of evidence? I want you to know this is a safe space, Margaret began, pouring tea with steady hands. Whatever you tell me stays between us. David doesn't need to know the details. What details would those be? Oh, honey. She sighed deeply. We both know why you're here. I sipped my tea and waited. Margaret couldn't help herself, she'd fill the silence eventually. I found my bracelet, she said finally. David mentioned that. Where was it? You know where it was. Actually, I don't. Why don't you tell me? For the first time, irritation flickered across her face. This wasn't going according to her script. I was supposed to break down, confess, beg for forgiveness. It was in your purse, Sarah. We both know that. Do we? Because I certainly don't remember putting it there. Memory can be tricky when someone has compulsions. There it was. The kleptomaniac angle, delivered with surgical precision. Compulsions, I repeated thoughtfully. That's an interesting word choice. There's no shame in getting help. These things often stem from stress, feelings of powerlessness. Like being cut from a will? Margaret's teacup rattled against her saucer. I don't know what you mean. Of course you don't. We stared at each other across the coffee table, two women who finally understood exactly what game we were playing. The silence stretched between us like a taut wire. Margaret set down her teacup with deliberate care, her mask of concerned mother-in-law finally slipping. I think you're confused, dear. The will was discussed months ago. This situation, with the missing items, is entirely separate. Is it? I leaned back in my chair, studying her face. Because the timing seems awfully convenient. First I'm out of the inheritance, then suddenly I'm a thief. Margaret's laugh was sharp, brittle. You're being paranoid, Sarah. Honestly, this is exactly the kind of thinking that concerns me. These conspiracy theories, the defensiveness. Show me the list. What? David said you have a list. Dates, times, missing items. I'd like to see it. For a heartbeat, uncertainty flashed in her eyes. Then the steel returned. I don't carry it around with me. It's in my safe deposit box, with photocopies for my attorney. Of course it was. Out of reach, impossible to examine, but official sounding enough to lend credibility to her story. Margaret had thought this through. Your attorney, I said slowly. The same one handling the will? Sarah, I'm trying to help you. But you're making this very difficult. She stood abruptly, moving to the window. David is heartbroken. He wants to believe you, but the evidence. What evidence? A bracelet that appeared in my purse while I wasn't looking? Are you suggesting I planted it there? Her voice rose with perfectly calibrated outrage. That I would frame my own daughter-in-law? I'm not suggesting anything. I'm just asking questions. Margaret turned from the window, her expression shifting to something harder. Let me be very clear about something, Sarah. This family has a reputation to consider. David's practice, Emma's engagement to the Morrison boy, my position on the hospital board. We cannot have unpleasantness become public. There it was. The threat beneath the concern. Stay quiet, accept the kleptomaniac label, and maybe this doesn't destroy everyone's precious reputation. So what are you proposing? You get help. Quietly. You return anything else you may have acquired, and we move forward as a family. David never has to know the full extent of things. And if I refuse? Margaret's smile was arctic. Then I'll have to share my documentation with the proper authorities. I've been tracking this for months, Sarah. Credit card statements showing your shopping habits, witness statements about your behavior at family gatherings, even photos of you handling items that later went missing. My blood chilled. Photos. She'd been building a case against me since before she cut me from the will. This wasn't opportunistic framing, this was premeditated character assassination. I could press charges, she continued conversationally. Some of the missing jewelry is quite valuable. Felony territory. But I'd prefer to handle this privately, for David's sake. I set down my teacup, fighting to keep my hands steady. You've really thought this through. I'm protecting my family. Something you clearly don't understand. My phone buzzed. A text from David, asterisk, how's it going? Mom said she'd call me when you're ready to talk, asterisk. I showed Margaret the screen. He's waiting for your call. Yes. To tell him whether you've agreed to get help, or whether I need to involve the police. She moved back to her chair, settling in like a queen on her throne. What's it going to be, Sarah? I stared at this woman who'd welcomed me into her family 7 years ago, who'd taught me her grandmother's cookie recipe, who'd held my hand during my miscarriage 3 years back. Who was now systematically destroying my life with the cold precision of a surgeon. I need to use your bathroom first, I said finally. Margaret smiled triumphantly. Of course, dear. Take all the time you need. I walked to Margaret's powder room on unsteady legs, closing the door behind me with a soft click. My hands were shaking as I pulled out my phone and opened the security app. The cameras were still recording, had been this entire time. Every word of our conversation was captured in pristine digital clarity. But as I scrolled through the feeds, my stomach dropped. The camera in the living room, the one with the perfect angle of the coffee table where she'd planted the bracelet, was showing a different view. Margaret had moved it. Sometime between yesterday and today, she'd adjusted its position just enough that our current conversation was happening in a blind spot. She knew. Somehow, she knew about the cameras. I fought down panic and kept scrolling. The other angles were intact, but none captured our faces clearly from this new seating arrangement. She'd stage managed this entire confrontation, right down to where I'd sit. My phone buzzed with another text from David, asterisk, Mom says you're upset. Please just listen to her. She wants to help, asterisk. Then another from Emma, asterisk, whatever's happening, we love you. Family sticks together, asterisk. And finally, one from an unknown number, asterisk, stop playing games, Sarah. You have 5 minutes before I make that call, asterisk. Margaret. She'd gotten a burner phone. I splashed cold water on my face and stared at my reflection. In 5 minutes, she'd call David and tell him I'd refused help, refused to return the stolen items, and that she had no choice but to involve the police. By tonight, I'd probably be in a cell while she played the grieving mother-in-law who tried everything to save her troubled daughter-in-law. But she'd made one mistake. She thought I was here to negotiate. I walked back to the living room where Margaret sat primly, phone already in her hand. Feel better, dear? Much. I settled back into my chair, noting how she'd angled herself away from the repositioned camera. I've made my decision. I'm so glad you're being reasonable. I want to see the safe deposit box. Margaret blinked. Excuse me? Your documentation. The photos, witness statements, tracking reports. If I'm going to confess to months of theft, I'd like to know exactly what I'm confessing to. Sarah, that's not how this works. Of course it is. You're asking me to admit to felony charges. Any lawyer would tell me to review the evidence first. I leaned forward. Unless there is no evidence. Don't be ridiculous. I told you, it's all documented. Then show me. Right now. We can drive to the bank together. Margaret's composure cracked slightly. The bank is closed. It's 2:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, Margaret. Banks are open. My banker isn't available. Safety deposit boxes don't require bankers. Just ID and a key. I pulled out my phone. Should I call First National and ask about their hours? You're being unreasonable. Margaret stood abruptly. I'm trying to help you, and I'm calling your bluff. The words hung between us like a gunshot. Margaret's face went through several expressions, surprise, anger, calculation, before settling on cold fury. You think you're very clever, don't you? Her voice had shed all pretense of maternal concern. You think you can manipulate me like you've manipulated David all these years? I think you're a liar. Margaret laughed, but it was an ugly sound. Prove it. I intend to. She moved to the landline on her side table, her movements sharp and precise. David? Yes, it's about Sarah. I'm afraid no, darling, she's not well. She's making wild accusations now. Paranoid delusions. Her eyes never left mine. I think you need to come over. And David? You might want to call Dr. Morrison. Yes, Emma's future father-in-law. The psychiatrist. My phone buzzed. David, asterisk on my way. Please don't do anything drastic, asterisk. Margaret hung up and smiled. He'll be here in 20 minutes. Dr. Morrison in 30. By then, you'll have had what witnesses will describe as a complete mental breakdown. Tragic, really. The stress of your compulsions finally caught up with you. I stared at her, finally understanding the full scope of her plan. This wasn't just about framing me for theft. She was going to have me declared mentally incompetent. The will, I whispered. Oh yes. Can't have a mentally unstable person contesting legal documents, can we? Dr. Morrison is very thorough in his evaluations. And very loyal to old family friends. My hands were shaking again, but this time with rage instead of fear. Margaret had been planning this for months, maybe longer. Every detail choreographed, every contingency covered. Except one. I stood up slowly, my mind racing through possibilities. 20 minutes until David arrived, 30 until Dr. Morrison could declare me mentally unfit. But Margaret had underestimated one crucial thing. You know what's funny? I said, walking toward the mantelpiece where family photos smiled down at us. You moved the living room camera, but you missed the one in the hallway. Margaret's smug expression flickered for just a moment. I don't know what you're. The hallway camera that recorded you coming into the house yesterday at 3:17 p.m., 30 minutes before I arrived. The one that shows you going straight to the kitchen, then returning to the living room with something in your hand. I picked up a framed photo of David's graduation. The timestamp will be very interesting to investigators. You're bluffing. But her voice had lost its confident edge. Am I? Should we call the police right now and let them sort through the footage? I set the photo down and turned to face her. Or better yet, let's call David and tell him about the cameras together. I'm sure he'd love to review all the recordings with us. Margaret's face had gone pale. David won't believe you. Not after everything. After everything what? After you planted evidence? After you built fake documentation? After you tried to have me committed to cover your tracks? I pulled out my phone. Let's find out. Wait. The word cracked like a whip. Margaret's composure was completely gone now, replaced by something desperate and dangerous. You don't understand what you're doing. The consequences. Enlighten me. She began pacing, her perfectly coiffed exterior unraveling. Do you have any idea what this family's reputation means? What David's practice is worth? Emma's engagement? More than my freedom, apparently. Your freedom? She whirled on me. You want to destroy everything for what? Money? Revenge because I saw through your act? What act, Margaret? Being a loving daughter-in-law? Caring for you when you were sick? Grieving with you when Harold died? Harold. Her voice broke slightly on his name. Harold would never have approved of this mess. He built something lasting, something pure, and I won't let you soil his memory with your... My what? My middle-class background? My public school education? The fact that I actually work for a living? Margaret's eyes blazed. Your manipulation. Your calculated pursuit of David. You think I didn't see it from the beginning? The way you wormed your way into this family, made yourself indispensable? The mask was completely off now. Years of suppressed resentment poured out in her voice. I loved you, I said quietly. I actually loved you like a mother. Love. She spat the word. You loved our money. Our connections. Our name. My phone buzzed. David again, asterisk almost there. Mom sounds really worried about you, asterisk. Then another text, this one from a number I recognized as Emma's, asterisk dad called. He's coming too. Says mom thinks you need help, asterisk. My blood froze. You called Robert? Margaret smiled, her confidence returning. David's father deserves to know his daughter-in-law is having a breakdown. Especially when it involves false accusations against his wife. Robert. David's father, the retired judge. The man whose word carried weight in every courtroom in the county. If he walked in here convinced I was delusional. That's your insurance policy, I realized. Even if David believes me, Robert won't. And between you and him, you can convince everyone I've lost my mind. Robert knows quality when he sees it. And he knows trash. Margaret straightened her blazer. He never thought David should have married beneath himself. The sound of car doors slamming echoed from the driveway. Through the window, I could see David's BMW and Robert's Mercedes. Margaret smoothed her hair and composed her expression back into concerned mother-in-law mode. Remember, dear. You're not well. The stress has been too much. We just want to help you. The front door opened and I heard David's voice, tight with worry. Mom? Sarah? In here, darling, Margaret called, her voice perfectly modulated concern. She moved to stand beside the couch, one hand pressed to her chest in a gesture of distress. David appeared in the doorway, his tie loosened and hair disheveled like he'd been running his hands through it. Behind him, Robert's imposing figure filled the frame, silver-haired, sharp-eyed, every inch the distinguished retired judge. Sarah. David's relief was palpable as he crossed to me. Are you okay? Mom said you were making accusations, acting paranoid. I'm fine. I kept my voice steady, aware that every word would be scrutinized. Your mother and I were just having a conversation about some missing items. Robert's gaze sharpened. Missing items? Margaret's performance began immediately. Her hand trembled slightly as she gestured toward me. Robert, I didn't want to worry you, but Sarah's been struggling. The stress of everything, and now she's convinced I'm somehow plotting against her. What kind of accusations? David looked between us, confusion creasing his features. I opened my mouth to speak, but Margaret cut me off. She thinks I've been framing her for theft. Can you imagine? She's demanding to see non-existent evidence, talking about cameras. Margaret's voice caught perfectly. I'm so worried about her mental state. Robert stepped forward, his judicial presence commanding the room. Sarah, these are serious claims. What exactly are you alleging? This was it. My one chance to be heard before they painted me as delusional. I'm alleging that Margaret has been systematically removing items from this house and planting them in my possession to make it appear I've been stealing. David's face went pale. Sarah, that's insane. Why would Mom do that? Because she cut me from the will and needed justification. Because she's been planning to have me declared mentally incompetent so I can't contest it. The silence that followed was deafening. Robert and David exchanged a look that made my stomach drop. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. Oh, sweetheart, she whispered, reaching toward me. Listen to yourself. Do you hear how that sounds? Robert's voice was measured, clinical. Sarah, paranoid delusions often involve elaborate conspiracy theories. The patient believes everyone around them is plotting. I'm not delusional. My voice cracked despite my efforts to stay calm. I have proof. What proof? David asked gently, the way you'd speak to someone on a ledge. The cameras. The footage shows. What cameras? Robert interrupted. Margaret dabbed at her eyes. She keeps talking about cameras. I think she's been recording conversations, imagining threats that aren't there. The security cameras in your house, Margaret. The ones that recorded you. Sarah. David's voice was pained. Mom doesn't have security cameras. The room tilted. What? I don't have cameras, dear, Margaret said softly. I never have. Harold always said they made him feel like he was living in a fishbowl. My mind reeled. The cameras I'd seen, the ones I'd repositioned. But I saw them. In the living room, the hallway. Where? Robert demanded. Show us these cameras. I looked around wildly. The corner where I'd seen the camera mount was empty. The hallway showed no signs of surveillance equipment. My chest tightened as the implications hit me. You moved them, I whispered. Margaret's expression was heartbreaking in its concern. Oh, honey. There were never any cameras. David's phone was already in his hand. I'm calling Dr. Morrison. Sarah, you need help. No. The word came out strangled. No, I know what I saw. But even as I said it, doubt crept in. Had I imagined the cameras? Was I actually losing my mind? Margaret reached for me, her touch gentle. It's okay, dear. We're going to take care of you. The walls felt like they were closing in. 3 pairs of eyes watched me with a mixture of pity and concern that made my skin crawl. I backed away from Margaret's outstretched hand, my mind racing. The footage, I said desperately. I have the footage on my phone. I downloaded it yesterday. David's expression grew more pained. Sarah, please. Look. I fumbled with my phone, fingers shaking as I scrolled through my files. The folder I'd created labeled evidence was empty. Completely empty. I don't understand. It was here. I saved everything. My voice was rising, and I could hear the hysteria creeping in. The videos of her planting the silver, the timestamps, all of it. Robert stepped closer, his judicial training evident in how he assessed my every movement. Sarah, when did you last sleep? Eat a full meal? This isn't about sleep. I snapped. Margaret, tell them about the will. Tell them how you cut me out after Harold's funeral. Margaret's face crumpled. Oh, sweetheart. Harold's will left everything to me. There was never, you were never. She couldn't finish the sentence, as if it was too painful. What? The floor seemed to shift beneath my feet. David's voice was gentle but firm. Sarah, Harold left everything to Mom. He always said he trusted her to take care of the family. You know that. No. I shook my head violently. Margaret showed me papers. She said Harold had included me but that she was contesting it because of my lifestyle choices. The silence stretched between us like a chasm. Robert cleared his throat. Sarah, Harold's will was probated 6 months ago. It's a matter of public record. Margaret inherited the estate in its entirety, as expected. My legs gave out and I sank onto the couch. But she told me. When did I tell you this, dear? Margaret's voice was so gentle it made me want to scream. I tried to remember. The conversation felt vivid in my mind, Margaret's cold smile, her dismissive tone as she explained why I was being cut out. But when? Where had we been? Last week. In the kitchen. You said I was too common, that Harold never really approved of me. Margaret's tears were flowing freely now. Honey, I would never say such things. You know how much we both loved you. Loved? David caught the past tense immediately. Robert placed a hand on his son's shoulder. Son, I think we need to face the possibility that Sarah's condition is more serious than we realized. I'm not sick. The words exploded out of me. Margaret, what about the missing items? The silver tea set, the jewelry, the photograph? What missing items? Margaret looked genuinely confused. Nothing's missing, dear. The Tiffany tea set from the dining room cabinet. It's been gone for weeks. Margaret walked to the dining room and returned with the tea set, placing it gently on the coffee table. The silver gleamed as if recently polished. This tea set? She asked quietly. I stared at it in shock. That's impossible. It was gone yesterday. I looked for it specifically. Sarah, David sat beside me, his voice breaking. You've been under so much stress since Harold died. Maybe your mind is just trying to process the grief in ways that... I am not crazy. I stood abruptly, pacing to the window. I know what I saw. I know what happened. But doubt was eating at me now. The cameras that weren't there. The files that had vanished. The tea set that was never missing. Robert's phone buzzed. He glanced at it and frowned. I need to take this. It's about Sarah. My blood went cold. About me? Who's calling about me? Dr. Morrison's office, Robert said carefully. David called ahead. They have an opening this afternoon. You already made me an appointment? I whirled on David, betrayal burning in my chest. I'm scared, Sarah. I'm scared I'm losing you. Margaret moved behind me, and I caught her reflection in the window. For just a split second, her expression of concern slipped, replaced by something that looked almost like satisfaction. But when I spun around, her face showed nothing but motherly worry. Was I imagining that too? I whispered. Margaret's face remained perfectly composed, but I'd seen what I'd seen. That flash of satisfaction, that momentary drop of the mask, it was real. Imagining what, dear? She asked, tilting her head with practiced concern. You looked different. Just now. I searched her expression for any crack in the facade. Like you were pleased about something. David rubbed his temples. Sarah, you're starting to scare me. Really scare me. Robert ended his call and approached slowly, like I was a wild animal that might bolt. The doctor can see you in 2 hours. I think we should. No. I backed toward the hallway, my mind clearing for the first time in days. Something's not right here. None of this makes sense. What doesn't make sense is you accusing my mother of elaborate schemes, David snapped, his patience finally fraying. She's grieving too, Sarah. We all are. Then explain the missing items returning. Explain the cameras I saw with my own eyes. Grief hallucinations, Robert said gently. It's more common than you'd think. The mind creates what it needs to process trauma. I wanted to scream. Everything had a rational explanation that painted me as unstable. Every piece of evidence had vanished or been discredited. It was too neat, too convenient. Margaret, I said suddenly, what did you do with Harold's study? She blinked, the first genuine surprise I'd seen from her. His study? You said last month you were turning it into a sewing room. You were packing up his papers. David frowned. Mom, you never mentioned redoing Dad's study. Because I'm not, Margaret said carefully. I couldn't bear to change anything. His study is exactly as he left it. But I remembered helping her box files, remembered her talking about needing to move on. Unless. I need to see it, I said. Sarah, David started. Just let me see Harold's study. Please. Margaret hesitated, barely a second, but I caught it. Of course, dear. Though I'm not sure what you're looking for. The study door was closed. Margaret turned the handle and pushed it open, revealing Harold's sanctuary exactly as it had been the day he died. Books lined the shelves, papers sat in neat stacks on his desk, his reading glasses still rested beside his favorite chair. My heart sank. Another memory that apparently never happened. But as I stepped inside, something felt wrong. The room was too pristine, like a museum display. Harold had been a naturally messy person, always leaving coffee rings and scattered notes. This looked staged. I walked to his desk and opened the top drawer. Empty. The second drawer, also empty. Where are his personal papers? His correspondence? I put them in the safety deposit box, Margaret said. For safekeeping. All of them? Even his everyday things? David examined the drawers over my shoulder. There's nothing here, Sarah. Maybe he kept important stuff at the office. But Harold had worked from home for years before retirement. I'd seen him at this desk countless times, surrounded by papers and projects. The drawers had been full of everything from business cards to grocery lists. This is wrong, I murmured, running my hand along the empty drawer. My fingers caught on something, a small piece of paper wedged in the back corner. I worked it free. It was a receipt, dated 3 weeks ago. For a storage unit rental. Margaret's eyes fixed on the paper in my hand, and for an instant, real fear flickered across her face. What's that, dear? She asked, but her voice had changed. The syrupy concern was strained now. I held out the receipt. Why would Harold need a storage unit 3 weeks ago? He died 2 months ago. The silence in the room was deafening. David stared at the paper, then at his mother, confusion replacing his protective anger. Mom, he said quietly. What storage unit? Margaret's composure finally cracked. Margaret's mouth opened and closed wordlessly, her eyes darting between the receipt and David's questioning face. For the first time since this nightmare began, she looked genuinely rattled. I can explain, she stammered, then seemed to catch herself. Her shoulders straightened and the familiar mask of concern slid back into place, though not quite as smoothly as before. That's not Harold's receipt, dear. It must have gotten mixed up somehow. But I was already examining it more closely. The name on the receipt was definitely Harold Brennan, and the handwriting on the application matched his distinctive scrawl. More importantly, the date was impossible to ignore. David, look at this. I handed him the receipt. This is your father's handwriting, isn't it? He studied it carefully, his frown deepening. It looks like Dad's writing. But that doesn't make sense. He turned to Margaret. Mom, did Dad rent a storage unit before he died? I wouldn't know anything about that, Margaret said quickly. Too quickly. Harold didn't tell me everything he did, especially toward the end when his memory was getting fuzzy. His memory was fine, I interjected. He was sharp as ever right up until the heart attack. Margaret's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. You weren't here every day, Sarah. I was. I saw the signs. Robert had been quiet, but now he spoke up. What kind of signs, Margaret? Harold seemed completely lucid at Robert Jr.'s graduation just a week before he died. The question hung in the air. Margaret looked cornered, and I realized this was the first time anyone had really challenged her narrative about Harold's final weeks. Small things, she said defensively. Forgetfulness. Confusion about dates. He was hiding it well, but I could tell. Then why didn't you mention this to any of us? David's voice carried a new edge. If Dad was having memory issues, don't you think his son should have known? Margaret's face flushed. I didn't want to worry anyone unnecessarily. You all had your own lives, your own problems. But I was thinking about the storage unit. Why would Harold rent one? And why wouldn't he tell Margaret? Unless. What if he was hiding something from you? I said suddenly. What if Harold discovered something and needed to keep it safe? Margaret's face went white. That's ridiculous. Harold and I had no secrets. Then you won't mind if we check out this storage unit, David said, his protective stance toward his mother beginning to waver. I don't have a key, Margaret said quickly. And I'm sure it's nothing important. Probably just old business files he wanted to organize. Storage facilities keep spare keys, Robert pointed out. We could contact them as next of kin. The panic in Margaret's eyes was unmistakable now. I really don't think this is necessary. We're all grieving, and digging through Harold's old papers will just make it harder to move on. But David was already pulling out his phone. What's the address on this receipt? He started dialing. Yes, I'd like to inquire about access to a storage unit. My father recently passed away and we found his rental agreement. Margaret made a small, desperate sound and sank into Harold's chair. Her carefully maintained composure was crumbling, and watching it happen felt like watching a dam break. David, please, she whispered. Some things are better left alone. What things, Mom? His voice was gentle but firm. What are you so afraid we'll find? Margaret looked at each of us in turn, and I saw the exact moment she realized her web of lies was finally unraveling. Margaret's face crumpled, but instead of confession, something else emerged, a desperate, cornered fury I'd never seen before. Fine, she said, her voice shaking with barely controlled emotion. You want to know what's in that storage unit? Your father was losing his mind. Completely paranoid in his final weeks. He became convinced that I was trying to hurt him somehow. David lowered his phone, shocked. What? He started hiding things from me. Important documents, family heirlooms. He said he needed to protect them from me. Margaret's voice broke convincingly. It was heartbreaking, watching the man I loved for 40 years look at me like I was some kind of monster. Robert stepped forward. Mom, why didn't you tell us this before? Because it's humiliating. Margaret snapped. How do you tell your children that their father spent his last days afraid of their mother? That he died thinking I was some kind of threat? I felt the ground shifting beneath my feet again. It was another perfect explanation, designed to make me look cruel for forcing this painful revelation. But something about her story felt rehearsed, like she'd been preparing this backup plan. If Dad was paranoid, wouldn't he have told one of us? David asked quietly. He never mentioned being worried about anything. Margaret's eyes darted to me with unmistakable venom. He was worried about her. About Sarah. He thought she was influencing me somehow, turning me against the family. The paranoia started right around the time she began visiting more often. My blood turned to ice. She was pivoting, making me the source of Harold's alleged mental decline. That's not true, I said, but my voice came out weaker than intended. Harold and I got along perfectly. He never seemed afraid or paranoid. Of course he didn't act that way around you, Margaret said, warming to her new narrative. You were part of what he was afraid of. He thought you and I were plotting together somehow. Toward the end, he barely trusted anyone. David looked stricken. This doesn't make sense. Dad called me 3 days before he died. He sounded completely normal. He was excited about the fishing trip we'd planned for next month. He had lucid moments, Margaret said quickly. But behind closed doors. She trailed off, pressing a tissue to her eyes. I realized with growing horror that she was constructing a new version of events where Harold's fears about her were actually fears about me. Where any evidence of her wrongdoing could be explained as the confused ravings of a sick man who blamed the wrong person. I want to see that storage unit, I said firmly. Whatever Harold put there, it'll prove what really happened. Margaret looked up sharply. Absolutely not. I won't have his illness put on display. Some things should stay private. It's not your decision, Robert said quietly. We're all his family. Actually, Margaret said, her voice gaining strength, as his widow, I have the legal right to control access to his belongings. And I'm telling you all to leave this alone. But David was still holding the receipt, studying it. Mom, this application, it lists an emergency contact. Someone other than you. Margaret went very still. What? It says, in case of emergency, contact James Morrison, attorney. David looked up. That's not Dad's usual lawyer. Who's James Morrison? The color drained completely from Margaret's face. She opened her mouth but no words came out. I felt a spark of hope. Maybe we should call Mr. Morrison. He might have answers about what Harold was thinking in those final weeks. No, Margaret said sharply. Then, catching herself, she forced a weak smile. I mean, there's no need to bother a stranger with family business. But it was too late. I could see the doubt growing in both David and Robert's eyes. David was already dialing information. Yes, I need the number for James Morrison, attorney. He looked at Margaret. What city, Mom? Margaret's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. I don't know any James Morrison. But Dad obviously did, Robert said quietly. Well enough to make him an emergency contact on a secret storage unit. I watched Margaret's face cycle through emotions, panic, calculation, then a kind of resigned determination that made my stomach clench. She was planning something. You know what? Margaret said suddenly, standing up straighter. Maybe you're right. Maybe we should clear the air completely. Her voice carried a strange, almost manic edge. Let's call this Morris in person. Let's open the storage unit. Let's drag every painful detail of your father's final weeks into the light. The sudden reversal was so unexpected that we all froze. This wasn't the desperate woman who'd been cornered moments ago. This was someone who just remembered she held better cards than we knew about. But when we do, Margaret continued, her eyes fixed on me with laser intensity, I want everyone to remember that this was Sarah's idea. She's the one who insisted on digging up things that Harold specifically wanted kept private. She's the one who won't let your father rest in peace. David finished his call and turned back to us. I got through to Morrison's office. He's agreed to meet us tomorrow morning. Says he's been waiting for Harold's family to contact him. Waiting for us? Robert frowned. What does that mean? Margaret laughed, but it was a bitter sound. It means your father left instructions. Specific instructions about what to do if anyone came looking for that storage unit. She looked directly at me. He was very clear about who he trusted and who he didn't. My heart hammered against my ribs. The confidence in her voice suggested she knew exactly what Morrison would tell us, and it wasn't going to be good for me. But how could that be possible? Harold had never shown me anything but kindness and acceptance. What kind of instructions? David asked. The kind that explain why Sarah was removed from my will, Margaret said softly. The kind that reveal what your father discovered about her true character in those final weeks. That's impossible, I said, but doubt was creeping in. What if Harold had seen something? What if Margaret had somehow convinced him I was a threat? Is it? Margaret asked. Think about it, David. Your father was a careful man. A thorough man. If he rented a secret storage unit and chose an attorney none of us knew, don't you think he had a very good reason? Robert looked troubled. What could Dad have possibly discovered that would? Maybe we should wait to hear what Mr. Morrison has to say before we speculate, I interrupted, though my voice sounded hollow even to my own ears. Margaret smiled then, and it was the most unsettling expression I'd ever seen on her face. Yes, let's wait. Let's let Harold speak for himself, from beyond the grave. She moved toward the kitchen. I'll make coffee. We'll need to be well rested for tomorrow's revelations. As she disappeared around the corner, David reached for my hand. Sarah, whatever Dad put in that storage unit, whatever he thought he knew. What if she's right? I whispered. What if Harold really did think I was some kind of threat? Then we'll deal with it, David said firmly. Together. But I could see the questions forming in his eyes too. Margaret had planted seeds of doubt in all of us, and now we had to wait until tomorrow to discover what Harold's final message would reveal. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Margaret's triumphant smile and heard her words, let Harold speak for himself, from beyond the grave. David tossed restlessly beside me, and I knew he was replaying the evening too. Around 3 a.m., my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. We need to talk before you meet with Morrison. Come alone to Millfield Park, 6 a.m. A friend. My blood chilled. I stared at the message, my mind racing. Who knew about the Morrison meeting besides family? I showed David, but he was deep in exhausted sleep, muttering something incomprehensible. At 5:45 a.m., I found myself walking toward the park's empty playground, my heart hammering. A figure emerged from behind the pavilion, a woman in her 60s with graying hair and kind eyes. Sarah? I'm Linda Morrison. James is my husband. I stopped short. Mrs. Morrison? Please, call me Linda. She glanced around nervously. I shouldn't be here, but when James told me about your call yesterday, I knew I had to warn you. Warn me about what? Linda pulled out a manila envelope. About what you're walking into today. James has been Harold's attorney for only 6 months. Harold came to him specifically because he didn't trust his regular lawyer anymore. Why not? Because Margaret had been accompanying Harold to his appointments, asking questions about his will, his assets. Harold suspected she was influencing his decisions. Linda's hand shook slightly. He wanted a completely independent attorney to document something important. My mouth went dry. What did he document? Harold suspected Margaret was stealing from him. Small things at first, jewelry, silverware, cash from his wallet. He started marking bills, photographing his belongings, keeping detailed records. The world tilted. But Margaret said he was paranoid, that he was hiding things from her. He was hiding things from her, Linda interrupted. Because he'd caught her red-handed. He installed a hidden camera in his study after his grandmother's ring disappeared from his desk drawer. I gripped the park bench for support. He had video evidence? Linda nodded grimly. Hours of it. Margaret going through his papers, pocketing cash, removing items from display cases. But here's the thing that'll destroy you today. In several videos, Harold mentions you. What does he say? He talks about how Margaret complained about you constantly. How she accused you of encouraging him to spy on her, of turning him against his own wife. Harold was worried that Margaret was setting you up to take the blame for her thefts. The pieces clicked together with horrible clarity. She's been planning this for months. Longer than that. Harold's documentation goes back 8 months. He was building a case, but he died before he could present it. Linda handed me the envelope. James made copies of everything before today's meeting. Harold specifically requested that if anything happened to him, you should see the evidence first. I opened the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside were photographs, bank statements, and transaction records, all in Harold's meticulous handwriting. Notes about missing items, suspicious behavior, and his growing certainty that Margaret was systematically robbing him. There's more, Linda said quietly. Harold changed his will without Margaret knowing. The real will, not the one Margaret showed you, leaves everything to his children equally, with a specific provision that you should receive his grandmother's jewelry collection. But Margaret said. Margaret doesn't know about the real will. James has been waiting for the right moment to reveal it. Harold was very specific. If Margaret tried to frame you for theft, the truth should come out immediately. I stared at the evidence, my mind reeling. This will destroy her. She destroyed herself, Linda said firmly. Harold spent his final months heartbroken that the woman he'd loved for 40 years was stealing from him and planning to blame an innocent person. A car pulled into the parking lot, David's SUV. That's my husband, I said. Linda stood quickly. Remember, James can't know I gave you this early warning. But you needed to understand what you're walking into. Margaret's going to try one final manipulation today. What do you mean? She knows about the storage unit because she's been following Harold's movements for months. She probably knows exactly what Morrison will reveal. Linda's expression darkened. A woman desperate enough to frame her daughter-in-law won't go down without a vicious fight. David approached us with Robert and Claire behind him. Sarah? What's going on? Linda squeezed my shoulder. Remember, Harold loved you like a daughter. Don't let her take that away from you. She disappeared toward the parking lot's other exit. Who was that? David asked as I clutched Harold's evidence to my chest. Someone who knew your father better than we thought. 2 hours later, we sat in Morrison's modest office as the attorney spread Harold's documentation across his conference table. Margaret had arrived with her own lawyer, a sharp-suited man who kept checking his phone with growing unease. Harold came to me 6 months ago, Morrison began, because he discovered his wife was systematically stealing from him. He clicked a tablet, and video footage filled the wall screen. There was Margaret, clear as day, rifling through Harold's desk drawers and pocketing cash. In another clip, she removed his mother's brooch from its display case, wrapping it carefully in tissue paper. Oh my God, Claire whispered. But Margaret didn't flinch. Instead, she leaned forward calmly. Harold was suffering from early dementia. These videos prove nothing except that I was managing his affairs because he could no longer. Actually, Morrison interrupted, clicking to another video. This one showed Harold himself, sitting at his desk, speaking directly to the camera. His voice was clear and strong. If you're watching this, something has happened to me, and Margaret has likely tried to blame Sarah for thefts that Margaret herself committed. I am of sound mind as I record this on October 15th. My wife has been stealing from me for months, and I have documented everything because I fear she intends to frame my daughter-in-law. The room fell silent. On screen, Harold continued, Margaret has complained obsessively about Sarah's inheritance, claiming she's manipulating me. The truth is the opposite. Sarah has been nothing but loving and honest. Margaret, however, has been planning something terrible. Margaret's lawyer whispered urgently in her ear, but she shook her head. Her mask was finally slipping, revealing something cold and calculating underneath. This is ridiculous, she said. Harold was confused, paranoid. There's more, Morrison said, advancing the video. Harold's voice filled the room again. I've changed my will without Margaret's knowledge. She is to receive only what the law requires. The bulk of my estate goes to my children, with Sarah receiving my grandmother's jewelry collection as originally intended. Margaret must never be allowed to use my death to destroy an innocent woman. David reached for my hand, his face pale with shock and growing understanding. Furthermore, Harold continued on screen, I suspect Margaret may have been poisoning me slowly. My symptoms began shortly after I confronted her about the missing jewelry. If something happens to me, please investigate. Margaret's lawyer stood abruptly. We're leaving. My client won't be subjected to. Sit down, Margaret said quietly. Her voice had changed completely, no more grieving widow, no more hurt confusion. It's too late for that now. She looked around the table at her children's horrified faces, at me clutching evidence of her year-long campaign to destroy me, at Morrison's impassive documentation of her crimes. You want to know the truth? Margaret's smile was razor-sharp. Harold was weak. He was going to leave everything to people who hadn't sacrificed 40 years of their lives for this family. Sarah showed up 5 years ago and suddenly she deserved heirloom jewelry that should have been mine? Mom, Robert breathed. I earned every dollar in that estate, Margaret continued. Every sacrifice, every compromise, every year I spent being the perfect wife. And yes, I was going to make sure Sarah paid for trying to steal what belonged to me. Morrison was already reaching for his phone. I'm calling the police. Margaret laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Call them. But remember this, I'm the only mother you'll ever have. She was wrong. Harold had been right about everything, and his final gift wasn't just clearing my name, it was freeing his family from a woman who'd been manipulating them for decades. As sirens wailed in the distance, David wrapped his arms around me. I'm so sorry, he whispered. Dad knew. He protected you even after he was gone. Justice, I realized, sometimes comes from beyond the grave.